the relationship between MSSPs and customers is actually really quite intriguing, and we're going to dissect it today. From my standpoint, I've been an MSSP provider now with Herjavec Group, and previously I've been in a situation where I've selected MSSPs and even built my own SOC in a previous life. So completely understand the challenges that need to be addressed when dealing with this relationship, and just like any marriage, it requires effort from both sides. So with that said, let's jump into the agenda. All right, so we try to break up this presentation into 3 parts. First, real quickly, we'll get into the why question. Why even engage an MSSP? What are the business drivers? What are the technical drivers, organizational drivers? From there, what better way to analyze and dissect but using an example? So we bring in back the classic crypto pair of Bob and Alice, and Bob and Alice will go through a case study describing the current situation with them and some of the challenges that are happening, and we could start to look at how to address those challenges. And then finally, the meat part of this presentation is the MSSP focus areas. So these are the best practices, areas that we focus on as a managed service provider, and we recommend organizations double click into and better understand. So these are your technical capabilities, operational readiness, onboarding, just your basic security incident response process, and then SLAs and contract terms. So throughout the presentation, you'll see checklists, work products. It's designed that way so that once you get this presentation after this session, you can use the checklist and you can use this actively as you go about better managing your existing MSSP or looking or onboarding a new MSSP. Okay, so let's get started. Why even engage an MSSP? So one of the biggest reason we see for engaging an MSSP is the people, right? So the people factor is drastic in that you need to hire at least 7 or 8 people to have a 24/7 shift that's compliant to government regulation, health regulations, etc. And so finding 7 or 8 security-minded people in general for many organizations, Global 2000 organizations, is challenging, let alone retaining them. So getting an MSSP just to have that coverage is a big driver. And what we see in this type of situation is when you do engage an MSSP, the folks that are in the security team on the customer side can focus on the strategic stuff. So we say the brains on site and the muscle off site. And this can help organizations scale out as they build out their security program. Second, retaining skills, right? Very challenging to say you do get the 7 or 8 plus, then trying to keep them interested, keep them attracted, and not going off to another organization. The third, the network effects, right? So the network effects, what we mean by that are the cross-client and cross-industry data of threat intelligence, of threat actors, of what is happening across the world, across industries. That you can really only get through an MSSP, and getting that type of data. We have had customers in the past that have had multiple MSSPs because the network effects weren't just enough with one. They wanted to have multiple MSSPs so they can have multiple sets of network effects. Finally, speed, right? So speed is a really important driver in that a breach may have happened, or there's an operational product launch that needs to be supported, and just getting people hired, getting technology in place, introducing new processes, it just takes too long. So the thought is to go and engage an MSSP. I'm going to give a chance for Stephen to jump in for a moment. Stephen, what are you seeing as far as why we're getting engaged as an MSSP?
Thanks, Atif. Well, like yourself, I've been working in security for now over 15 years, and I've worked with a number of different managed services providers, including now Herjavec Group. And I'd say the majority of clients that I've dealt with over the years are coming at a managed security services perspective in terms of looking at improving their overall security posture. And so they're looking to build out something which enhances what they have internally, looks at improving their overall security features, looks at taking advantage of the technologies that they have in place today, and really looks at, how can they leverage the managed security services provider to become an extension of their environment and improve overall security. But I would say, even though that's the majority, we do get the occasional instance, and I can think of a couple of recent customers where, we get what I would call the panic mode customer, where they're having a major security incident, potentially an outbreak or even a major data breach, and we're brought in to come and help them to go through that and then put in place some proper monitoring, put in place some proper defensive posture. And frankly, the lessons learned we've had with that is it becomes very, very cumbersome and very, very difficult to onboard a client in that environment. And so I guess my lessons learned from that is, try and make sure you can do this as proactively as possible and make sure that you think about what you're looking for from a managed security services provider and make sure you're asking all the right questions and getting all the things that really make your overall security posture better.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, so let's look at an example, right? So we talked about early on that we're going to give a short case study. Of course, this is fictitious. Bob and Alice are fictitious, but we thought we'd bring out some of the key characteristics that each side typically has and some of the ways that we can address it. So let's meet Bob and Alice. First, Bob. Bob is an anxious account manager, right? So these are global managed service providers covering all aspects of technology as well as global reach. So in Bob's situation, he has dozens of customers, and the MSSP is growing so fast that continues to increase. He is focused on SLA adherence and customer sat. But how's customer sat defined? That's a question for us to think about later. Then, Bob's a smart guy, but he just tends to get overloaded with clients and client requirements based on what he could actually take in. So you'll hear from Alice in a moment, but the complaints that Bob gets from Alice is that he's asking for requirements such as give me your asset list, give me your escalation model, who are your stakeholders, who are the business owners, and he's not really getting answers back from Alice. So that's one of his top complaints. He schedules meetings to go over tickets, to go over threat models with Alice and Alice's team, but no one shows up. Alice only wants to talk to Bob when there's an emergency. She doesn't want to talk on what we call the times of peace. It's always the times of war when they're talking. And bottom line, Bob complains that he just doesn't get Alice's attention. Let's meet Alice. So Alice is a crafty CISO, and we put her in the retail world. And anybody on the webinar is in the retail world. It's very thin margins, so the ability to do more with less is key from an IT perspective. So she has a small team of engineers. They doesn't have any budget for any type of headcount. She's been throwing some OpEx budget, which she intends to use and has been using for managed services. She's looking for strategic partners, but how are they defined it tends to be pretty loose. And she doesn't like to admit this, and none of the CISOs do, but she has very little influence over the business units. She hasn't taken the time to go and get to know how the products work, how the business is driving, and getting the mutual respect with the stakeholders in the business units to have her changes and her recommendations actually get implemented from a security standpoint. Alice's complaints about Bob. So Bob used to come and ask her how things were going as far as the overall security program. Bob used to give roadmap presentations of what's coming, make recommendations on what other things he should consider, offer his resources up for free to help with her projects that were going on. She used to get a lot more attention helping to develop her program, not anymore. And so she's always asking, how come when you ask me for requirements, you don't give me any examples? Like you make it very hard for me to come up with these requirements. So I need more help with the requirements. So that's the complaint from Alice's side. And again, same thing. You used to give me more attention and not anymore, just like a married couple. So let's jump into a short video actually, where we're gonna look at this relationship in more detail. And as you hear it, listen to their voices, see their faces, and this is the type of tension that brews in an MSSP customer relationship.
It's just, there's all this pressure, and sometimes it feels like it's right up on me. And I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
Yeah, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just...
Don't...
Try to see things my way.
All right, so that is our lovely couple, Bob and Alice, and as you saw from the video, there's definitely some things going on there. And what we're going to ask next is, what's the nail, right? So what are the blind spots that Bob and Alice have? And so we'll go through this together. And by the way, so at the end of each section, we're going to go through some questions that are coming from you. So feel free to post the questions in here, and we'll address them throughout the presentation. And particularly on the blind spots, if you see any blind spots or you want to bring up any blind spots, we're going to go over a few now, but I'd love to get your feedback as well as things that go wrong in a MSSP customer relationship. So first, with Bob, some of the blind spots that we noticed right away is that because of the philosophy of the set and forget for the large global MSSPs, they're really upfront and getting things moving, but once things get moving, they tend to go focus on other clients. That's one of the big blind spots that we saw. Also, onboarding, which we'll talk about in more detail in the technology capabilities and overall focus areas. Onboarding is a very important part of the MSSP lifecycle. And it seems to be that Bob and Alice really rush through onboarding just so they can get to the billing part and get the managed services going on a day-to-day basis. We talked earlier about requirements that, in order to say that, hey, give me an asset list, why not provide a sample asset list so that Alice has a way to populate something and get something back instead of it just sitting in her queue. A business context, right? So this is something Bob really needs from Alice is, okay, so what should the use cases really be? And, we talked about earlier, Alice doesn't really understand her business in the retail side and what they're actually doing from a business perspective. And so from Bob's side, he has to meet his SLA, right? And at that standpoint, he'll just move on to his next customer. Those are some of the blind spots that we're seeing on Bob's side. What about Alice? So from Alice's side, we talked about the org influence. So she seems frustrated. She doesn't know how to proceed, and she's kind of paralyzed because of the lack of organizational influence. So maybe spending some time closer to the BUs and understanding how operations goes, what's important from a business perspective to her stakeholders that she's protecting with the security program. Alice has spent a lot of money on technologies and bought a bunch of it from Bob, but they're become outdated. They have default configurations because she doesn't really have staff, and she wants Bob to help her get those devices in a latest configuration, expansive rules, etc. And access-wise, I mean, she has access to some of the security stuff, but what about the rest of the network, the rest of the devices? So if there's a change that Bob wants to implement, what's Alice's influence to actually get the changes to happen? And finally, another blind spot for Alice is her ability to escalate things and take action once Bob has shown her that there's a problem. Like for example, there's a nail on her head. To be able to pull it out or to talk about it, you'd rather talk about it and move along. So that's another blind spot from Alice's perspective. So with that, we're going to jump to the focus areas. But before we do that, let's take a couple questions from the team, from the rest of the attendees.
So Tiff, we do have a question here, and the question is, if Amy has little organizational influence, what can we really do to help her with that, or how do you help her with that?
Yeah, so if you're a managed service provider worth anything, you should have customers across industries. So you should have the ability to go talk about retail use cases. Tell Alice that, hey, for this other retailer, these are the type of use cases that we're driving because their business requirements tend to be blah, blah, blah. For example, point of sale systems, PCI compliance, the low bandwidth upstream from different stores across the country, across the world. There's some key drivers that we see as a managed service provider with other industry-specific requirements that we could start that conversation with her, and maybe she could bring us to a meeting with her to help influence the stakeholders on what we see from a security perspective. All right, let's just move along. We took one question, and just to keep on good on time, we'll move along to the next section. So we talked about in the beginning that there's going to be 4 focus areas. Each focus area is designed to give you a survey of things that we see, things that are important within the focus area, and then we summarize it with a top 6 or top 5 type of chart of best practices, things to look for. That, of course, we'll distribute this presentation afterwards so you can capture that. So number 1 is around visibility, right? So having technical capabilities to see your environment, getting visibility into your environment. So the question we often get, one of the first questions we get is, what should I be logging, right? What should I be looking at from a security operational perspective? What do you recommend, MSSP, as far as what devices to look at? So we don't recommend to boil the ocean. We recommend to start with a phased approach with the low-hanging fruit types of devices. These are your standard stuff, your firewall, your AD logs, critical servers, antivirus, and as well as your IPS systems. Basic stuff just to get some data flowing, some use cases built. Also, considering each environment's different, but application logs from core applications as well as database and security device logs would be the first wave. And again, this is designed to just give you something to walk away with from this webinar with some examples to use. And eventually, let's get into more phases of log events coming in. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, it was all about getting all your logs in one place. It doesn't matter what it was, right? It was just about centralized logging. Now we've evolved where it's, okay, I got all the logs, what do I do with it all? How do I make sense out of it? How do I convert data into information, right? And so in order to do that, we recommend doing it in a phased approach with the log devices that you pull in. From there, there's the shift from traditional SIEM environments where you had signature-based detection. So signature-based meaning that if someone logs in interactively from a shared account, from a geography that was outside of your regular IP range, your network scope, fire off an alert. A valid rule, good rule, but what has happened is these SIEM rules have become, there's just so many of them, right? And to be able to manage them, rules all by themselves, has become overwhelming. So what has emerged now is these big data analytics platforms that look at SIEM rules, but they also look at it from a behavioral-based standpoint, is how has this behavior changed? So if that system account is interactively logged on 50 times a day, 50 maybe is normal, right? Maybe it's 500 or 5,000 that triggers action from your organization, and watching the behavior of that use case is more important than actually that use case firing itself. So I'm going to give Stephen a chance to jump in here too around big data analytics and what we're seeing.
Yeah, it's a great point, Tiff. I mean, we're seeing a lot of customers, whether they're moving directly to a big data analytics engine as their primary security monitoring tool, or a lot of clients who are still using their SIEM technology because of the investment, but because of the capabilities, using that to do log aggregation, log analysis, but using the big data analytics engine to provide much greater enhancement and data enrichment, whether it's data and security trending, whether it is more enhanced investigation capabilities, whether it's ongoing searches. All of those things are much more amenable within a big data analytics environment. And so we see a lot of clients that are migrating to that environment, leveraging that. We ourselves use it as part of our managed service. We actually enhance all of our clients' SIMs or their own big data analytics with a data analytics engine on the back end for us to actually look across all of our customers and look at common trending, look at threat intelligence across multiple industries and bring all that intelligence. And so, leveraging big data analytics is really key.
Thanks, Stephen. And to Stephen's point, we're trending and anomaly detection is key. And just some pictures from our SOC. I mean, we have various different customers that we're watching the frequency of alerts and then the patterns of the alerts that are coming across industries, across customers, and visually seeing the anomalies pop up, taking advantage of the time of the human eye versus using machine learning and machine analytics to automate and enrich the types of alerts that are coming into the SOC to couple what the Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 analysts are doing. Threat analytics is a hot topic. We get all sorts of questions about threat analytics. I think the three buckets to look at threat analytics in is, number one, is just the raw threat feeds that we have coming in, whether it's in the SOC or whether it's at the raw log level. There's various different vendors out there that are offering threat analytics feeds. I would recommend that you select one that's based upon the industry focus of the threat actors. Not all of them are the same, and not having one is better than the other. It's having the one that's right for your actor analysis, your threat effects that are affecting your industry, your business. And so that's one side of it, bucket number one. And then the second bucket is really the larger picture of what other attacks are happening around the world. And what you're seeing on the screen is an example of a picture from one of our SOC screens of different attacks that are happening across customers across the world. And so if you have a malware outbreak happening in the energy sector, that can prompt you to take precursory actions in financial services or in healthcare with other clients to minimize downtime, minimize damage that can happen from one attack across the world. So the threat analytics around your customers, this is what I call the network effects early on, is the second bucket that we're looking at. And then third, threat analytics falls into just what I call the sneaker net. And that is your SOC analysts talking to each other and working together, working issues and collaborating with each other, which cannot be minimized because that's a really important aspect as you get into the weeds of an investigation, comparing your data with other security professionals in a way where you're applying threat intelligence and seeing if you could proactively use it to defend your other sources. So threat analytics is a loaded topic. I think as an industry, it's early stages for threat analytics because there's so many attackers, but there's so little feeds right now. And that's going to change, but let's just continue to move along here. Dashboarding and reporting is important. There were gone are the days where you would run a report and wait a week or a day or even 5 hours before you have the results of that report. Now it's all about real-time dashboards that you could see firsthand right now what's happening. So for example, on the screen you're seeing here in the top left, there's a heat map of different types of alerts that are coming in. We use similar heat maps to look at, for example, VPN logons. Do you even have operations in Asia? Why are you having all these VPNs being logged on? So that you could see that real time happening right now from a visual standpoint. So before we move along, I just want to stop here for any questions that we could take around technology focus, the technology focus area.
There is a question here, Tiff, and it's going to make you laugh. It says, if I already have 24/7 operations and threat feeds, what more is an MSSP adding?
Yeah. No, great question. We deal with this often with our clients where they actually already have large operations. But I mentioned this early on, the network effects, right? Like I mentioned, one of our largest casinos in the world is a customer, and they have multiple MSSPs specifically for the network effects, right? That is getting data about threat actors and attacks that are happening around the world across customers. You can't do that on your own, right? And then secondly, it's just a reality that the security organizations supporting any type of non-technology industry like automobile or healthcare or financial services, where you're not actually selling technology, but you're selling a different type of product and service, security is a secondary piece of that puzzle, meaning you want your security resources to be focused on strategic things and not the operational components. So that's where the limited resources that are available for security really play in the factor of being strategic versus being operational. Brains on site, muscle off site. Let's move on. Focus area number 2, and this is my favorite topic. It's actually the most boring topic, but it's my favorite topic because this is what saves marriages, right? Onboarding. Onboarding is what would have kept Bob and Alice a lot more happy. And onboarding is talking about, okay, what do I do? How do I get a customer into the system, into the process? And a lot of times organizations jump right in. They say, yep, we signed the contract. Let's go. Let's just start managed services next week. And then, MSSP may say, or may or may not say, hey, but we have this whole onboarding process to get us locked from a process standpoint. Let's go through that carefully. A lot of times it's like, no, okay, fine. Let's just move as fast as we could. But they really need to be pumping the brakes at that moment and check from your side, from the customer side, do you have your house in order? So do you have the basic components in play? Do you have a CSIRT plan, right? What do you do for an incident? How is it documented? How is it run across the organization? Are there tabletop types of exercises? And so your MSSP can give you a template for this and can give you some ideas on how this can run. However, it's really up to the customer organization to have that not just written down, but communicated, and people actually know who's on first, who's on second, who's on the red team, the blue team, the yellow team, however it's defined to handle an incident. And actually, this isn't that very hard because you already have that in play for infrastructure and your overall technology operations. I mean, you almost have to. And so it's just taking that and amending it from a security standpoint to add security types of use cases. This is probably one of the most important ones, the asset classifications and who owns what. So it's great if you can get an alert that says it's a 7-1 alert about an attack that's happening and you're proactively trying to protect it. But who do you call, right? Who owns that device? Who owns that box? Who has the authorization to reboot it? How does that all break up? So an MSSP should be able to give you a template on how to fill out the key aspects of your asset list. But that's something that you need to have at least a start for before you engage in MSSP. Ticket pileup is a fun one. This is a example of, especially in my old world at Comcast, my team did a great job of finding problems, but it was a lot harder for us to actually fix the problem. So trying to patch the servers or add TLS instead of SSL or make the changes, implement changes, and this is where organizational influence comes into play. But if you engage a managed service provider and you already have a bunch of unresolved tickets with an inability to ever be closed, they're just going to give you a lot more tickets, and it's just going to be a big pileup. So getting a start on that process and getting stakeholder buy-in is really, really important. Similar to the first bullet that we talked about, war games, this is just the IR exercise, and many of the folks on this webinar have sat through an insecurity incident or have worked through at least a tabletop. And what you'll find is, and you'll agree with me, is that it's not really the technology when it comes to these things. It's about who talks to who and how it's being communicated and who makes the decision of shutting it down or bringing it back up. There's a lot of business context there that needs to be addressed, and you got to practice it, right? And that's the war games that need to happen beforehand. And then finally, response procedures. Sure, the MSSP can help you with that. What do I do with the malware outbreak? What are the steps that I take? How do I go about patching? These things, there are some templates that can be used, but it's different for every organization. So those templates need to be customized for each client environment. And then it's the fun part of onboarding, right? So we're not going to go through all of these, but this is just to give you an idea of some of the operational items that need to be addressed for onboarding. So I like to define onboarding as a marriage of process, right? And yep, marriage is boring. So is marrying processes, right? So there's a lot that needs to happen when you marry processes. Everything from asset lists to tiered response plans, escalation trees, all the good, fun stuff that needs to be defined. And if you rush through this, you're just going to have a sloppy MSSP relationship with your customer. And from an MSSP side, they're not going to feel like they're adding much value because every time if something's escalated, it's just a one-off. And then from a customer side, it's frustrating because you're saying, oh, my MSSP doesn't help me at all. They just tell me stuff that half of it's false positives and the other half of it I don't know what to do with. So if you would have defined who owners are together for different assets, and if you would have defined escalation trees as to who exactly to call, so you're not calling the wrong guy at 2 in the morning, that's a big no-no. That's all part of onboarding. And the onboarding process, I get the question all the time as to how long does it take, and it really depends. But what we find for Global 2000 companies trying to onboard devices, I mean, there's some level of scale with types of logs that are coming in, but it's up to 3 months, right? The technology part of it, getting that implemented, it's a few weeks, but then getting the process interlock, the week-over-week conversations, getting the escalations right, that takes up to 2-3 months to get it to a place where you're really in a good, happy state from an onboarding perspective. A lot more to say about onboarding, but let's just continue to move along. Some work products. So if your MSSP says, hey, what's your CCERT process? You can say, well, I don't really have one, but can you give me a template? Can you give me something that I can start with? They better be able to do that. And, here's an example of one that you could start with and you could amend to meet your business. Same thing with change management. There's trees that exist. You may have some. You could ask your MSSP for best practices and work together to define this and agree upon this so that way when you want to push an IPS block rule, how to go about doing that. Is it automated or is it something that needs to follow a process? So to summarize, I mentioned that we're going to have best practices at the end of each of the sections. We're at the end of section 2. So for onboarding, we mentioned many of these already. I wanted to point out number 1, the difference between a notable event and incident. At Herjavec Group, we never declare incidents. It's always our clients that are declaring the incidents because they understand the business ramifications and they're accountable for the business ramifications of an attack. And a lot of times we get asked, how do I determine business ramifications? And we stress the 3 Ds: the disruption, degradation, and nuisance. By categorizing and rating each of the notable events by those 3 Ds, then actually, I think my nuisance D is a little messed up there. That's an N, not a D. But by categorizing them by those 3, disruption, degradation, and nuisance, we're able to determine, is this really an incident? And the client declares that incident versus a notable event. So that's really important to define. We talked a lot about critical assets and ownership and how they get prioritized. Number 3 is interesting because it helps to reduce false positives. So by defining the results of your vulnerability test, whether internal, external, integrated them into your SIM, integrated dashboard, you're able to tell that, okay, that Linux server that was unpatched has a very low vulnerability score. So the sense of urgency to patch that versus a Linux server that has a high vulnerability score is less. So you can prioritize and categorize what do you work on first based on vulnerability scoring. Number 4, process and escalation, basic blocking and tackling. It has to be defined together. There's no secret formula for that. It comes from meetings and collaboration between MSSP, customer, and business units that are part of the customer organization. Poor man's owner list. So oftentimes you get the question as to, well, I don't know what my assets are, and I don't know who owns them. It's just a big bucket, and they moved around, and I'm new, and we've acquired other companies, and how am I supposed to know that? Well, there's some real basic things you could do, like look at last logon from a Linux tree standpoint to see who's actually logging into it. Chances are they probably are the owners or they know who the owners are. Correlating that information to your employee directory to figure out org structure and where something may belong. And very quickly, you can get at least 60%, 70% of your asset list and ownership criteria done just by doing some very basic exercise that you could probably script to do for you. And then finally, I have some sample operational readiness checklist. But this is defining upfront within that first few weeks as to what needs to get done before we go to a 24/7 managed service operation. And without this operational readiness checklist, you don't move on. And this requires sign-off from the head of the managed services organization and the head of the customer organization that, yes, we're ready to go 24/7 operations. And here's some example checklists of things that you could put on your operational readiness checklist and in a way to get there. So I don't know if we are doing good with time, Aaron. Maybe we should continue, or do we take a question?
The only question I wanted to flag is someone asked, did you really just say marriage is boring? If your wife was on the line, I think you'd be in trouble later. But let's continue for the purposes of time.
Yes, yes. The more boring your marriage, the more successful your marriage, right? That's what I've been told. Married 10 years, by the way. All right, focus area number 3, incident response. So sometimes the folks that are new to MSSP, they tend to think that that's all an MSSP does, right? They do incident response for me, right? They find alerts and they handle it. And that's a core fundamental tenet of a managed service provider, absolutely, to be able to detect, evidence collect, contain, these are the basic blocking and tackling, and they absolutely should be doing this. How do they do it, right? Which is key part has to go into the use cases. And when I talk about use cases, here's a methodology on how to develop use cases. But use cases are, for example, in this in Alice's world, we have this idea of different types of point of sale systems in the retail world being attacked, right? So data exfiltration is an important use case. So how do I quantify data exfiltration? So for example, someone can log in and then be able to move data very quickly across multiple nodes across their global footprint. How do I detect that? So a lot of times, the wrong way to do it is to just buy a bunch of technologies and use whatever they have to try to solve that problem. The right way to do it is by doing use case development. So for example, the example we just talked about with data exfiltration, you may be able to use your existing devices to solve that use case, which is the worry. That's what's keeping you up at night is data going out. But you may be able to use your existing devices. Vendors don't want to hear that because they want to sell you something new. But if a lot of times organizations don't have use cases defined, and so because of that, there's not a clear direction of what actual technologies really need to be bought. Another good example of that is LAN speed violation, which is saying that someone logs in on a VPN from one area, one geography, and within seconds they log in on a VPN in another geography. Very basic use case, important use case, but you don't necessarily need the latest and greatest type of firewalling or VPN accelerator or technology XYZ to solve it. You may be able to use it using your existing use cases. So what you're seeing on the screen is, what's the approach, 4 steps on how do you develop use cases. And I also have some checklists that you'll see after this that help you define what type of use cases to apply in your environment. And by the way, I mentioned for an MSSP, this is focus area number 3, the basic incident response. Of course, they're going to do that, but they should also help you with the use case development, because MSSP should know in different industries what are the key types of use cases that come about. I would say that the majority of them are very similar across industries because security is that way. But within each industry, there's definitely a pocket of 25%, 30, 40% of use cases that are specialized just for that industry. And so, just quickly going through these, it's all about figuring out what are the most valuable assets and high business impact assets, and then modeling the use cases around them. And then when it's all done, step 4, then figure out what technology to use to implement it. Right, and as engineers and technologists, we want to just play with the box, and we got a new lovely web application firewall device, and you want to use it, but you may be able to do the same type of use case with an existing device that you already have. All right, so just summarizing, we talked about just putting your critical devices first, the first things first, and then be environment-centric. So you don't want to treat your dev and test like you do your prod. You could spread the love of controls across different environments when you do use case development. Number 3, fluid thresholds is really important. This is the example of the failed logons by 50 accounts versus 500 accounts versus 5,000 accounts. That needs to be done on a basis where it's a variable where you could quickly change. And just building out the list here, we talked about what and why as to the types of sources that are coming in and why you actually need it, and not just log in everything. Logging everything's great, but if you're not using that data effectively, then you're not getting the right use cases out of your technology deployment. And then finally, track them all is a concept that MSSPs use as far as not just looking at SEV1s and SEV2s, but also looking at SEV3s and SEV4s on a cumulative basis over the course month over month. So you could understand and see the lurking issues that come up over time with the SEV3s and SEV4s. All right, so I just have a couple reference slides in here. You know, as part of this use case development, there's some good resources out there. There's some links in the slide deck to get to them so you can help you with use cases. Some sample use case checklists as to coming up with what are the right use cases for my retail organization, financial services organization, and this is all part of the onboarding process to help develop. And so running low on time, so we're just going to jump into the final section, focus area number 4, which is SLAs and contracts, right? And process is kind of boring, and contracts is even more boring, right? Actually, it's a lot of fun. The contract part of the MSSP relationship is a lot of fun if it's done right. So what we're going to do here is look at some key do's and don'ts. And by the way, I fell into the don't number 2 there with the socks. I don't do that anymore. Not a good idea. Number 1, don't do a POC of an MSSP. And this is actually a really important point because a lot of times we get the question of, can I do a POC of your whole methodology of your practice? And the reality there is it takes a lot of time, not just for the MSSP, but also for the customer, because they have to invest people and resources to answer all the questions around asset lists and escalation trees and et cetera, all the long checklists that we have. The customer has to welcome the MSSP to the rest of their BUs, right? So they have some political capital on the line as well. So 3 months later, you go through all this process, are you going to pull the plug, right, and do it all over again? And so selecting an MSSP, it should be done, instead of doing a POC, it should be done with a lot of due diligence. So everything from a reference to really getting into the weeds with the engineering teams and the analysts that are serving the SOC through a SOC tour. That's what we strongly recommend for MSSP evaluation. And absolutely do unannounced VA scans, right? This is, some of the ops guys get frustrated with this, but we see it's a necessary part of our business. And there must be done. There should be tests happen unannounced to make sure that our customers feel that they're being protected. 5-minute SLAs. So this is another counterintuitive one. Of course, you're going to get an email, a notification, or a phone call, communication within seconds of an attack happening. But are you going to get meat in that conversation or in that email? No, you need more time, right? The analysts typically need between 30 to 45 minutes to process that incident, to see how it affects the rest of your organization, and then coming up with the right next steps. You know, you can throw a alert over the fence that says that, hey, you know, this bad guy is brute forcing you, black hole him right now, right? But what does that really mean? What's going to be the impact of that for the rest of your organization? And so defining that takes time. So you don't necessarily want to have 5-minute SLAs because you'll get what you ask for, which is not meaningful escalations and recommendations. And SLA penalties are also a necessary part of the business, and you should absolutely include them in. Typically, they're done with credits, and there's other ways to handle it. But as part of your checklist of what to put in the contract, penalties are definitely enforceable, and it's a good idea. And the 1-year contract is something that you know, you can't really do a POC. So you said, okay, well, after a year I'll quit. In some large organization, it takes a year to really get to a really fully onboarded process, because in a way you have to do onboarding for every BU, and so that may take longer than 3 months to get up and running. And then also, if you do a 3-year deal or even a 5-year deal, you'll get a better overall price for the service. And so that's something just to think about as you weigh out whether you do a 1-year or 3-year. And finally, early on, we talked about Bob and how he has to be measured upon his customer sat. But what does customer satisfaction mean? How is it defined? Put it in the contract, right? Define some simple key performance indicators to be judged how well the team is doing. And this can be from how quickly things are resolved to how quickly a ITS rule is implemented. I mean, there's technical ways to do it, there's procedural ways to do it, but there should be some sort of finish line in there. I don't want to call it a prenup agreement in a marriage, but a set of criteria that is definable to measure how well the organization is doing and put it in the contract. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Stephen, who's going to give a shameless Herjavec marketing plug for us. And thank you for joining this webinar. Stephen, can you help us?
Absolutely. Thanks, Atif. So yes, it wouldn't be a webinar without at least a little bit of marketing promotion. What we've tried to do here today is really give everybody a feel for some of the best practices, some of the things that we've seen, industry leaders look at and examine and implement from a metrics perspective and from a proper process perspective to make their managed services relationship and to make their overall security monitoring work really, really effectively. And so, we have a lot of our own capabilities that we can address for each of the areas that Atif outlined today, and happy to share those with you on a separate occasion. But just to give people a bit of background, if you're not familiar with Herjavec, we are an information security focused company. We eat and breathe and sleep and sometimes wake up in the middle of the night thinking about security all the time. And we provide end-to-end security solutions, everything from helping our clients choose the appropriate technologies and implement them within their environment, through to providing information security consulting and compliance assistance, things like PCI, and NERC-CIP and other compliance requirements, helping our customers align what their needs are with what our experience has done, and then helping them to operationalize it through our managed services practice, as well as providing incident response. So when things do happen, and they do, in today's day and age, we know for a fact that no matter how much security protection you put in place, that things still do happen, and so you need to be able to respond to those. And so being able to have all of those things in one complete entity is really important, and it's what our clients are looking for in terms of a security partner. It's what's helped us to grow to be a global leader from a managed security services perspective. We have SOC operations that we're rolling out globally throughout not only North America, but the UK and Asia Pacific as well. And it's what got us ranked 23rd on the Cybersecurity 500, something we're very proud of. We were the top 3 managed services providers in the top 25, and we're very happy with that achievement. And so I'd lastly like to leave everyone with a short video that kind of gives you just a high-level overview on some of the elements of our managed services, and look forward to any questions that may come up afterwards.
At Herjavec Group, information security is what we do. We are laser focused on protecting the infrastructures of global enterprises. Our expertise includes consulting and compliance, product and service delivery, managed services, and incident response. Our managed services practice has grown substantially over the past decade. Herjavec Group can administer, maintain, support, monitor, and manage customer security technology 24/7, 365. We pride ourselves on our ability to turn data into actionable intelligence for our customers. We have designed our entire managed services practice to support large, complex, multi-technology environments. Our SOC is geo-redundant and PCI compliant. We have secret clearance as well as SOC 2 certification. Our managed services practice offers the ultimate flexibility for our customers. We manage on-prem, cloud, and hybrid solutions. We also support varying access options, including full admin, shared admin, or monitoring-only access, all based on the client's preferences and needs. As we onboard a managed services client, we ask the right questions to understand their pain points. We've made the investment in our people, processes, and technology to ensure that we're adding value to the client's security posture. When we first onboard a client, we inspect their data sources and ingest data from their technology. We are vendor agnostic and support a best-of-breed technology ecosystem. We then integrate the client's security technology with that vendor's threat intelligence offering. This threat intelligence feature will augment the existing intel being leveraged within Herjavec Group's analytics platform. Next, we apply Herjavec Group's alert framework to the technology. The alert framework is made up of client-specific use cases, as well as our own predetermined alerts. With this, we proactively identify attacks across key categories including authentication, targeted attacks, malware, DDoS, and traffic anomalies. The alert framework triggers an alert which is directed to Herjavec Group's analytics platform. The alert is sent via TLS tunnel or site-to-site VPN from the managed technology to our platform. Herjavec Group's analytics platform is highly effective in dealing with unstructured data. Once an alert is received, the platform performs a series of automatic functions. Cross-client correlation, trending, IP reputation scoring, anomaly detection, aggregation, deduplication, resulting in an email output that is ready for investigation by our trained analysts working 24/7, 365 in our Security Operations Center. Our analysts will review the output email and use a predefined, documented, and client-approved interaction model to notify the client of the security event that took place. They will escalate based on the documented workflow and provide actionable recommendations for remediation. The flexibility of our managed services practice allows us to thrive in complex environments. We offer context and value through our Herjavec Group alert framework and analytics platform. We support real-time threat intelligence and anomaly detection. We also share a clear incident response and escalation framework with our customers, so they know what to expect if and when a security event occurs. At Herjavec Group, information security is what we do.
Thank you all again very much for spending some time with us today to learn a little bit more about our managed services practice as well as best practices industry-wide. There was a question that came up during the video, and it was, will the content from today's presentation be shared? Absolutely. We will be sharing a PDF with all attendees, so that will come out to you shortly. And if there are any additional questions or information that you're looking for, you can either email us at the address provided here, mssp@herjavecgroup.com, or visit our website, herjavecgroup.com. Thank you, and please enjoy the rest of your day.